Hello, my name is Yuan Lu. I'm a first-year PhD student at the University of Notre Dame. Today, I'm here to present to you our position paper, a bottom-up and user-intelligent assistant approach to empower gig workers against AI inequality. In the rideshare gig work ecosystem nowadays, platforms such as Uber and Lyft serve as an intermediary between passengers and drivers. They reduce the friction of finding service by passengers and receiving tasks by drivers. As we can see here, passengers send requests to platforms, and then platforms dispatch these tasks to drivers, and then drivers give rides to the passengers. But contrary to the flow we just saw, the flow of data between the three parties in the ecosystem look very different. The data flows from both parties, passengers and drivers, to the central rideshare platforms as these platforms take advantage of their intermediary position. For individual passengers, one can only see data of the requests they already sent out. Similarly, for each driver, they only see tasks dispatched to them. The whole matching and dispatching algorithm is opaque and has become increasingly so, obviously, for the interest of platforms. Platforms in this case has the incentive to keep the data opaque so that they can charge as much as possible from the passengers and pay as little as possible to the drivers. This is what we call the data divide between platforms and individual drivers. In addition, with possession of this large amount of data, rideshare platforms feed it to their machine learning models for tasks such as matching passengers with drivers and determining drivers' pay. These AI systems are owned by platforms and designed to optimize the platform's best interests. They're often not transparent to drivers, and many are known to have systematic gender, racial, and socioeconomic biases. On the other hand, drivers don't have all of these AI. Individual drivers don't have access to AI in their best interest due to the technical barriers of such technology. This one is what we call the technology divide between individual drivers and large platform corporations. So these are from previous literature and our understandings of the situation. Do workers feel these inequalities in their daily job? What do they say about their working situations? We've been engaging with organizations such as New York Worker Institute and Chicago Rideshare Advocates to collect first-hand information to understand workers' perceptions of the problems we just mentioned. So, in one of our conversations, Laurie Simmons, a gig worker organizer from the Chicago Rideshare Advocates, mentioned that Uber designed gamification to make drivers hooked on working long hours. On the right, the image says, "You're $6 away from making $40 in net earnings. Are you sure you want to go offline?" This simple nudge appeared on the driver's side of the app. It's very manipulative, given the driving conditions workers are usually in, leading to really long working hours for drivers, even if they don't want to. Some workers complain that the opaque matching algorithms provided limited information regarding the ride, making it really hard for them to decide to accept or decline. However, declining too many times will hurt their own ratings, so just accept in most cases. As we can also see here, the interface is also very manipulative. Declining is a little small button in the top left corner, while accepting only requires a tap on the large area on the bottom center of the screen. Some workers have already taken bottom-up measures to help each other as well. Some drivers reported the use of primitive methods to share information between themselves, such as messaging each other on platforms such as WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger to share work-related information. Such kind of information include potentially a high demand at the airport or anecdotes of high surge pricing near some areas. So, to address these power inequalities between the platforms and individual workers, there are a few existing approaches that have been taken to help workers. Firstly, there have been legislative efforts, as many of us have heard. However, these tend to be very long processes and have many pushbacks from large corporations as they have more power and resources compared to individual drivers. Also, for many advocate organizations, in our conversations, they told us they like empirical evidence to support the legislative work in favor of individual workers, which made it even harder. Many are also investigating the design of more fair algorithms to be used by large corporations. Practically, these are not entirely in line with privately owned platforms' business interests, so it's not likely that the large platforms are going to adopt them in the longer term. Next, many of researchers are also working on building community-owned platforms, hoping leaving out the centralized platform can give individual workers a better working environment and better pay. However, building a platform also tend to be a long process that requires much resources. There are also many design challenges involved in building and maintaining such systems. So, taking all of these into considerations, and also consider the data inequality and technology inequality we mentioned previously, here we'll propose our approach, what we call fighting fire with fire. The ideas is very simple. If rideshare platforms take advantage of data for their interests, we give data access to drivers too. Here's the current paradigm. Individual drivers contribute their data to the platform without knowing anything about what other drivers know. We propose, what if we instead use a bottom-up approach, circulate the data between drivers as well? Since platforms are collecting data from the drivers at the end of the day, the drivers also have a copy of their individual data. If they collectively aggregate such data, we can construct a sample of the data that Uber and Lyft possess. For technology inequality, if platforms are training their AI models for their interest, we can give AI access to individual drivers too. This is where the idea of fighting fire with fire really comes into play. Now that the drivers have the data we previously mentioned, we can empower drivers who are not AI experts or developers with AI agents that can support their individual decision-making and working habits for their own interests and desires. More specifically, we address the data inequality using decentralized real-time market prediction. Most likely, we'll only be able to collect a small sample of real data from the subset of drivers in an area. But in areas like Chicago, historic rideshare datasets are legally required to be publicly shared online. We can see here a description for the Chicago historic rideshare data, a dataset containing 251 million trips in Chicago, starting from 2018 that has been constantly updated. The dataset contains information about trips, including timestamp, duration, miles, locations, year-end tip, etc. Combining these two, this large-scale historic data with sample real-time data, we can use machine learning techniques to make real-time estimation of the whole area's market to approximate the data Uber and Lyft have at hand. With these data, we can also empower drivers with their personalized AI agents. One essential consideration for our AI agents is that they need to be personalized based on different drivers' goals, preferences, and constraints. For example, some drivers might have caregiving duties at home, therefore prefer to stay within a certain distance when driving so they could get home quickly if needed. Another example of personal working preference is that some might in general want to maximize the monetary gain, while others prioritize avoiding rush hours so they don't get stuck in traffic too much. We also need to ensure these AI agents are transparent and drivers understand these AI assistants' suggestions and the rationale behind. Designing such systems also require us to consider the distinct constraints drivers face when interacting with screens while driving on the road with passengers on board. We believe building this network of workers and agents has implications for adjacent research directions. Because we enable decentralized data sharing between drivers, we break the data monopoly of Uber and Lyft. The analysis results of such data can potentially surface systematic biases in platform algorithms and serve as more concrete evidence for future legislative progress in policymaking. Our vision also resembles the one for community-owned platforms. In our approach, with the network of workers and agents, there's potential for all drivers and agents to coordinate together for the collective interests of the group. It might even foster the creation of what we call agent-facilitated unions for digital gig work platforms, that it may increase the bargaining power of workers in the future. However, there are still many research challenges and open questions for this direction we're pursuing that we would like to discuss more in our community. Many of these challenges are actually shared with adjacent directions as well. Now I'll break them down one by one with you all. So first, we focus a lot on drivers' interests, but how do we also balance customer access inclusion at the same time? If workers have access to AI-enabled assistance to get tasks drivers desire, a possible side effect is that passengers whose tasks are considered undesirable by drivers may suffer from long wait times, higher prices, or in the worst case, exclusion from the service. So how do we make a good balance between all parties involved? And secondly, our approach is essentially also designing a socio-technical system, and such systems requires a lot of careful design decisions. For example, while groups of drivers work together to mutually benefit each other, there's also competition between drivers in busy areas. In addition, we also need to consider what's the long-term community goal we want to optimize for considering each individual driver's distinct needs. Practically, how to get resources to maintain a system like this in the long run, potentially at mid to large scale, is another question for a research community like us. Another open area is how to design personal AI systems for non-experts, in our case, rideshare drivers. We need to make it easy for gig workers to convey their distinct needs, working habits, and personal goals to the system and have the systems adapt accordingly. Lastly, what are further implications for understanding and addressing gender and racial biases in gig work using our data and the system we design? How should we integrate our end user intelligent agent approach together with many other approaches we've been discussing here at KaiWorks into the larger landscape of research on biases and inequalities in gig work? So these are all the open research questions that we have. This is not possible without our great interdisciplinary team of collaborators. We have researchers from engineering, sociology, information studies, and urban and community research. We also work closely with local communities and advocates, including the Chicago Gig Alliance under the People's Lobby and Dining Online in the Michigan, Indiana region. So this is our position paper, and it's a long-term ongoing project. We welcome all of you to continuously discuss and collaborate with us. Thank you very much for listening.